Hey there, soulmates. We have plenty to talk about today. Happy Monday. Hope the weekend was good. Welcome to FOXSOUL's Black Report. I'm Courtney Hicks.
And I'm Nicordelai Corte. It's Black History happening now. That's why we're honored to stand behind this desk each day to take you on a journey across Black America and share with you the stories that are impacting our people.
We're going to bring you our news, our views, and our voice. So let's take a look at today's top headline that takes us to Missouri, where community and family is making any last attempts possible to save the life of a man who is scheduled to be executed tomorrow. Leonard Raheem Taylor was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder over the 2004 killing of his girlfriend and her 3 young children. Witnesses say Taylor was 2,000 miles away from the scene of the crime at the time of those murders. Attorneys from the Innocent Project say Taylor's lawyers effectively abandoned him, providing an incompetent defense at trial. They're asking for Governor Parson to delay the execution until a thorough investigation can be completed. And we've been following the story, taking a deeper dive. There is surveillance video that shows Taylor passing through security at St. Louis's airport on the morning of Friday, November 26th of 2004. He caught a Southwest Airlines to California to actually go see a daughter that he had previously before this relationship with the woman he is accused of killing. And so there's that evidence. And then as the prosecutors claim that has no effect on what they think, because they feel that he was fleeing the scene of the murder and that he had already committed these murders. But further evidence shows that not only was he in California, but that his daughter was put on the phone with one of the young children in the relationship that he was in, I guess, just maybe to meet each other ear to ear, which actually puts him at the scene, or puts him in California.
That's right.
So, there's a lot of evidence here that suggests he is innocent. It's heartbreaking to think that an innocent man could be executed. Folks are hoping for at least a stay so the investigation can continue.
Yeah, and at the very heart of this issue is this idea that there hasn't been a fact finder that has reviewed all of the evidence related to this case. It's important to also note that Taylor did have a criminal record and a history of violence. He'd done some time in California for a rape he was accused of in 2000, raping a 16-year-old stepdaughter. He was also a seasoned drug dealer who trafficked cocaine across the country, amassing a string of fraudulent IDs and such. But this is the issue. He may have a very checkered past, but the fact remains that facts have not been reviewed in his case in detail, and we're on the eve of potentially an innocent man being put to death under Missouri law.
Yeah, and even on the other side of it, let's say he is guilty, wouldn't you want all of the T's to be crossed and the I's to be dotted, and that investigation to have gone as far as it could possibly go? And so that is the issue there. So we're hoping at least maybe he would get a stay, and so that investigation can continue for as long as it needs to, for something exact to be established.
Yeah, I mean, it really raises the question of convicting folks beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
And essentially the Innocent Project is saying that there is some room for doubt here.
That's right.
Without every single one of the facts being examined by a fact finder. We'll continue to stay on this story, but moving ahead, established in 1919, Memorial Park Cemetery is one of the oldest African-American cemeteries in Tampa, and now it's under new management. The family of John Robinson, the previous owner, purchased Memorial Park in 1929. He maintained the property up until he died in 2019. Then the city of Tampa took over the maintenance. They hope to officially take ownership of it earlier this month by placing a lien and foreclosing on the site and then purchasing it at a county auction. However, when the auction came around, the city was outbid. Can you believe that? Their $9,000 bid was beat out by an $18,000 bid by the company, 2715 West Slay LLC.
And this company essentially is a company that buys property and flips property. So that is really like the huge concern. Like, what is this new owner going to do with this cemetery? City officials are a little perplexed. I'm sure they have a lot of questions to answer as they were outbid. And then local officials like the folks at the Tampa NAACP are now questioning, not only the lack of action or attention from the city, but also, what is this new owner who's known to flip properties going to do, with this cemetery, that people and citizens have a deep tie to, as that's where their loved ones are resting.
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't know that flipping cemeteries was a thing. I mean, we've all heard of folks flipping properties. I'm sure there's somebody in our family or in our friend circle that is familiar with the practice of flipping properties. I've never heard of flipping cemeteries, and who knows, this may be the very beginning of a very good reality TV show.
I don't know, but it sounds like, the person who bid the highest and got the property is a property flipper. Now, if he's ever flipped cemeteries before, I don't know, and I would hope not, and I would hope that those would not be his intentions.
I hope the producers of Flip My Ride are listening closely, because Flip My Cemetery may be your next big hit.
Not a hit at all. Just unfortunate, really. It really is. We'll keep our eye on this story as well. A week after delivering a powerful eulogy for Tyre Nichols, Reverend Al Sharpton makes a historic trip to the United Kingdom to champion voting rights and police accountability. The civil rights leader will make a 2-day visit to the UK, addressing the shared challenges around voting rights and police accountability for Black Americans and Black Britons. Sharpton will address Nichols' death and the parallels of police brutality in the UK, where the number of stop and searches for Black people increased 24%. That's since COVID-19. As many Americans have called for justice for Tyre Nichols, Britons have demanded similar reforms after several instances of police misconduct.
The Republican-controlled House Oversight and Accountability Committee has disbanded the Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. The former committee, which focused on issues like voting rights, freedom of assembly, and criminal justice reform measures, were first started back in 2019. Now, the Republican representatives claim the move is to make the House Oversight and Accountability Committee more efficient. There's been no reason given why the subcommittee was removed or if at any point it will be reinstated.
North Carolina's newly seated Supreme Court will decide on whether people convicted of felonies should be permitted to vote. Now, these privileges would only apply if they aren't in prison but still are serving probation or parole or have yet to pay fines. The justices listened to their first high-profile case since the court flipped to Republican control back in January after a Democratic majority for the past 6 years. They didn't immediately rule. Now, there are currently tens of thousands of people with a felony statewide in North Carolina.
And staying with the formerly incarcerated for a moment, the Minnesota legislature just last week advanced a bill to the governor's desk that now restores the voting rights for people with felony records. Current law prohibits voting until a person's sentence is complete, including probation and parole. Under this bill, a person with a felony conviction would be able to cast a ballot upon release from incarceration. 21 states already allow felons to either regain their voting rights immediately after leaving prison.
I think what makes, this particular passing so interesting is that a couple of Republicans in this state flipped and went ahead and agreed. For me, I think, listen, sometimes we mess up in life and we have to pay the piper, if you will. I know there's been some argument as to what types of felonies, that they have committed, and would that have any bearing on would you want them voting, on certain policies and for certain, politicians. So that debate continues, which is why in some states it's still caught up in argument. In other states, they've decided to pass it through. It looks like here in this particular state, because a couple of Republicans did flip, they were able to pass that through. So, but I do believe that all in all, the debate will continue.
And it's good to see that time served really means time served. You know, if folks have been sentenced and they have done their time, then why not restore their voting rights? I'm thinking of the work that Desmond Meade led in Florida with Amendment 4. And as mentioned in the story, you know, there are nearly 24 other states that have done this. And it's heartening to see that there's an issue out there, at least in the states, where Republicans and Democrats can agree. And it wasn't just on restoring these voting rights. They also agreed to make Juneteenth a state holiday, right?
Right across the hall.
and that bill received overwhelming bipartisan support, 126 to 1. Where do you, on what issues these days do you hear, you know, numbers like that? And the last thing, I think it's important to connect the dots between the efforts that are afoot related to voting rights, the fight for voting rights here in the United States and around the world. We talked about Al Sharpton, who traveled to the UK, and he wasn't just talking about voting rights, he was talking about police reform, which we so urgently need in this country. It was not his first time visiting Britain. He's been visiting quite often for the past 30 years. But it reminds me of something that a former leader of Amnesty International once said to me. He said that, you know, don't think that, you know, stop and frisk in New York is not exported as public policy in other parts of the world. Even on the local level, there are cities around the world that are paying attention to what we're doing and not doing here in the United States. And so just how they, you know, take notice of the things that we do well and the progress that we make, they also take note of the regress that we make. And Britain is no different. And, you know, just since COVID-19, stop and searches of Black people have increased nearly 25%. This is just since the COVID-19 pandemic. And so clearly globally, we have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, well, big ups to the state of Minnesota. I mean, both of those passings fare well on our side, as though, you know, we're always been pushing for Juneteenth and seeing as though the numbers are very disproportionate when it comes to who's incarcerated. Those bills are going to work for us for sure. Moving on here, there are new reports that are over 20 hours of police footage related to the death of Tyre Nichols. We're told that footage has yet to be released, and officials are discussing whether or not to file additional charges against the now 7 officers involved. It is up to city officials and the police department if the additional video from January 7th and that altercation will be made public as of this weekend or this past weekend. The family attorney, Ben Crump, says the family has not seen the extra footage.
And sticking with this story for a moment, the Tennessee Department of Health Board has suspended the license of 2 Memphis EMTs who failed to render proper aid to Tyre Nichols after he was beaten by police last month. Robert Long and Jamichael Sandbridge were reportedly on the scene of the January 7th traffic stop, which ended with Nichols handcuffed and unable to speak or sit up on his own for 20 minutes before they attempted to help him. Following a suspension, the 2 EMTs and Memphis Fire Department Lieutenant Michelle Whitaker were terminated. The department said that the 3 individuals violated multiple policies and protocols. Nichols, 29 years old, suffered critical injuries, including kidney failure and internal bleeding. He died 3 days later.
In another deadly police encounter, the family of Amir Locke is filing a civil lawsuit against the city of Minneapolis. Police shot and killed the 22-year-old while serving a no-knock warrant in a homicide investigation about a year ago. He was sleeping at the time and grabbed a gun when officers entered the apartment. He thought there was an intruder. The family says the past year has been very, very hard to get through.
Meanwhile, Democratic Senator Cory Booker says he's talking to a pair of Republican senators about potential policing reform. Booker has a lead negotiator. He's been a lead negotiator of an unsuccessful effort to pass a policing reform bill in 2021 with Republican Senator Tim Scott. Now, Booker says he and Scott have now stopped talking about the issue since the failed efforts 2 years ago. Booker also said that he has had recent conversations with Senator Lindsey Graham about the policing reform measures. Graham has mentioned the idea that there may be a compromise on qualified immunity, which was one of the sticking points in negotiations between the parties in 2021. Courtney, I just hope that we're not just seeing political theater play out before our very eyes in an attempt to bring the temperature down on the issue. Public sentiment is everything when it comes to passing any legislation, but especially legislation like police reform. I think it's interesting that, people are looking to Cory Booker and Tim Scott, the two black senators, two of the three black senators in the Senate to lead on this. But, what about the Senate Judiciary Chairperson, Dick Durbin? What about, Lindsey Graham? What about so many other senators that can play an outsized role in helping to get this thing over the finish line? So I hope it's not just, typical political theater, but I hope that there is an honest effort that is afoot to get this thing over the finish line. I
think the biggest block that Brother Booker has is the fact that he's just dealing with folks across the aisle, Republicans who just aren't interested in this type of reform, and that is the pebble in the shoe, if you will, and that is a big task to overcome. Like we were just talking in Minnesota, a couple of Republicans flipped. I don't know on the federal level if he'll have that sort of kind of momentum to help flip. We can only hope so, and if not, that we just trust him, Booker, to continue to push and push for the reform, much like Vice President Kamala Harris mentioned at the Tyre Nichols funeral. But what this does bring to mind is this campaign, seeing as though we've highlighted 3 cases with black men, and this whole campaign that you see on social media about black men being able to grow old. And I think that's what's the most heartbreaking and the unfortunate connection between all of these cases. Very young men who had their future ahead of them, despite where they may have gone wrong, they still should have had the opportunity to self-correct and redirect and live a healthy, promising life. Well,
there's definitely reason to keep hope alive. Just this past weekend, I interviewed Judge Mathis on my radio show, and he reminded my listeners on KBLA that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, a lot of people said that was dead on arrival. There were a lot of folks in the Senate and in Congress that were not interested in that. And so if we were able to get that through and get through the obstruction in Congress that existed then there's hope for police reform in this country. So let us hope that Judge Mathis has it right.
Still ahead, an apology from one school district after a racist meal is served for lunch.
That's right. Find out what the original meal was substituted for that has black students upset. You're watching Fox Soul's Black Report. We'll be right back.